Today, our class, the title for it is God Sees You. A while ago, my brother called me up and had me read Job chapters 1 and 2, and he called me up a little bit later, and we talked about it. First thing he asked me was, what did I notice? And at first, I didn't really notice anything, but he pointed out to me a few things in there that we're going to look at. But I have a question to kind of preface what we're looking for through these. So how many of you have heard something along the lines of, God doesn't see you, he only sees his son, or he only sees Christ covering you? That was an open question if anyone's heard that or not. Okay. I've heard that a few times, and yes, that is kind of true. He does see his son, but that's not all he sees. So we're going to look at a few passages on why that's not entirely true. And starting with Job chapter 1, verse 6 through 12. Again, that is Job chapter 1, verse 6 through 12. And I'll be reading out of the New King James Version. All right. And this says, Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, From where do you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro on the earth, and walking back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil? So Satan answered the Lord and said, Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, and around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person. And so Satan went out from his presence of the Lord. So this is one of the main focuses in this verse is verse 8. The Lord says to Satan that, Have you considered my servant Job? So keep in mind that this passage is before Jesus died on the cross, so before Christ covering our sin. And God recognizes that Job, this human being, this person, is a blameless and upright man. I don't know about you, but when Ezekiel pointed that out to me, it was just like, God sees this, I don't know if this is okay to say, but this bag of flesh as a blameless and upright man. I can't help but think that God sees us in the same way. So this idea of, and he mentions it again later on, which we'll look at, but he's taking this person and recognizes that he sees him, because Jesus hasn't died on the cross. Christ isn't covering our sin, so he doesn't see his son on him. He just sees the person. So that right there alone kind of blows that idea of Christ doesn't see us. So also a little side point that my dad pointed out when I was making the lesson, verse 12, when God says, do what you will with him, just don't touch him. Just because he sees Job as a righteous man doesn't mean that his family is safe from Satan. Which we'll see in verse 18 later. So I'm getting at, this is a side point, I'm not getting full deep into it, but just because your dad or your parents were a follower or a believer doesn't mean that you can claim that because It is your choice to follow Christ. So that's a side point. I didn't really want to go too deep into that, but Dad pointed out and I had to. Does anyone have any thoughts on any of that?
I think kind of like both. I think that's, even though you don't want to go too deep into it, I kind of want to just
I agree.
yeah, it's just, it is true that when you think about it, you don't want to ever have like, if you're the one that does go. Thing you don't want your kids to feel that, just because I go, you're your own person.
Right.
And then you also want to make sure that, you understand that, just like you're saying, is that God does see you, individually. So that means that, kind of like what Josh said about original sin, you don't inherit all these things like that.
It's funny you bring that original idea up. It's because when I was going through this, I was like kind of wanted to tie it in, but I didn't really know how to. So, in case you didn't hear Reggie, he's saying that even though like you don't want your children to go just because you're going, he wants you want your children to make that choice to go. And I'm going to bring up my past. Before I was, I don't know, probably about 10 or 11, I was just going because it was what we did. That was our family. That's where we went. And probably 13, 14 is when that mindset changed for me, is this is something I need to do. This is something that is, it has a purpose for me. So, yeah. So moving forward, if anyone else doesn't have thoughts. If you have a thought, just blurt it out. So moving forward, we're going to look at chapter 2, verse 1 through 6. Again, that is chapter 2, verses 1 through 6 of Job. And it says, "Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, 'Where do you come?' Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro on the earth, and walking back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and shuns evil, and still holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause." So, in case you didn't read Job 1 and 2, I'm going to give semi-quick summary of chapter 1. So after Satan goes out from talking to God on, you've put this hedge around Job, I can't touch him, God gives him permission, do everything you want to him, just don't touch him. Satan goes out from there, and he basically destroys all of his farm, all his cattle, all his livestock, everything he has. And a servant from that comes running to Job, telling Job about it. And in the middle of the servant talking to Job about that, another servant comes and says that all of his sons, his daughters, have died in a building falling on them. So Satan goes out, destroys everything that Job has, and Job, what does he do in that scene? Verse 20 of chapter 1, Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell down and worshipped. So this man, this human, has had this tragedy that is just, I don't know, if, for me, I wouldn't be able to, I don't know what I would do. But this man, he gets up, he tears his clothes on him, shaved his head, and he fell down and worshipped God. That is why God says Job holds fast to his integrity. He doesn't care. Well, he might care, but he doesn't see this as a loss. He falls down and worships God because he knows God has a plan, and he wants to follow it no matter what. So that's a semi-quick summary of chapter 1. So moving forward in chapter 2, after Satan is talking to God about God says that, consider my servant Job. In verse 4, so Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yes. All that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. So, Satan essentially says to God that, yeah, you've protected him because he won't follow you if you let me hurt him. So God says in verse 6, and the Lord said, behold, he is in your hand. Just don't kill him. So do what you will, just don't kill him. And so Satan goes out from there and from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. So Job gets these boils from Satan, and in case you didn't, I don't know exactly what a boil is, but I know it's something that's like a sore that gets on your arm or on your skin that is so painful that Job, he gets a broken pot piece and just starts scraping himself to relieve pain. And I don't know if any of you have had like a bug bite or something, or better yet, when we went to res camp, we got all those little, I don't know what they were called, those little bug bites. Those were itchy beyond itchy. Like, everyone was scratching constantly. This is that, about 1,000 times worse. And so while he's doing that, in verse 9, then Job's wife comes to him and says, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. It got to a point that Job's wife has said, you're a fool. Just curse him and die so you don't have to suffer through all this. And Job doesn't listen to her. He holds fast to his integrity. He holds fast to God's plan. So, where am I? So, again, I'm going to point this out, that Job has this mindset of, I don't care what happens in this world, God is my focus, and I'm going to focus on it through everything. Doesn't matter what happens to him, he's going to worship God through everything. So I want to point out that, whatever Job went through, he focused on God, and it's like, and God noticed it because of that. Much like us. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to point out, I was going to say that when you really think about it, that every day you're around people that don't have, like, the strength of how much, like, you put into the Lord. Mm-hmm. And when something bad happens, they're just as quick to say, why don't you curse him? Right. And it's just like, and then I think that's always the one thing that was always hard for me to kind of understand when you like start your walk with God, is that sometimes you start with a group of people, sometimes it's usually your family, and then eventually numbers can start dwindling slowly, and then it really starts making you feel like like you still call them, you still talk to them, of course, because it's your family, but then just to hear that from them, like curse God and give up practically.
Yeah. Here, Reggie, he's getting at this point of you when you start out in the walk of Christ, that a lot of times you'll have these trials come up, and at the start you'll have your family with you. You can get through it easily, but throughout time, those numbers of people around you will start to dwindle, and at that, it'll get to a point sometimes that even the people that helped you start will even tell you, curse God and die, or for instance of Job. So to kind of go with that, the I just want to point out whenever we go through some sort of trial that's just tragic and we're not going to get through it, just think back of what Job went through. I guarantee you'll get through it. So, so jumping back to the point that I was making before Reggie's comment, so God noticed that no matter what Job went through, he always focused on him, trusted him. And much like that, God knows each and one of us individually. So he knows that whatever we're going through, and if we're faithful and upright, we will focus on him and trust him, much like Job did. So, does anyone have any comments on that?
I think it's important to recognize that Job 1, 2, how that Job didn't put himself in volunteer for this, what he was dealing with. But the Lord, more or less, you know how someone speaks on your behalf? The Lord told Satan what type of individual he was, so
Right.
that even put him more in the hot seat, so to speak.
Right.
So, it's one thing for you to do it upon yourself, or for someone else think so highly of you. God said, hey, have you considered my servant Job?
Right.
The more, like him. And, Satan turns his head, spiritually speaking, says, oh yeah, I can take care of Job. But it goes to show you that it's not always about the exterior, it's the internal, the interior that God deals with. He knows what's inside of us.
Right.
And whether we're going to, stand up before His call, so to speak.
Right. Kind of going along with that, there's a passage, I can't remember where it is, but it says God won't allow us to go. Yeah, that one. I can't remember where it is, but He won't allow us to be tempted beyond what we can bear. That goes hand in hand with Job, because Satan goes to God, and God gives Satan permission to do what he wants. Just don't kill him. And the reason, at least the reason I think of why God allows him to do what he wants, is because he knows Job's heart. He knows he can handle it. Yeah. So moving forward, there's another passage that I want to tie in with all this. That's Jeremiah 1, verse 4 through 5. Again, that's Jeremiah 1, verse 4 through 5. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations. So, in Jeremiah, it states that God knew us while we were in the womb, before we were born. So, if God can't see us without Christ covering us, then how can he see us in the womb? Because last I checked, that for Christ to cover us, we have to be baptized. If you're in the womb, you can't get baptized. And along with that is, I'm going to try to tie in Josh's original sin topic. If original sin was practiced or was a thing, then God wouldn't be able to see us in the womb, because he can't look upon sin. So if we had original sin, then why is Jeremiah stating that he knew us and saw us in the womb? Anyone have thoughts on that? Okay. Shoot, man, I did not get enough out here. I'm coming to the end of the class. All right. So God sees and knows who we are. He knows our desires. He knows our heart. He knows everything about us. on Wednesday, I had this thought when Maverick was teaching of when he said, stay in the Word, I couldn't help but think back to what my dad always says. That is probably his favorite line. That is what he always says is stay in the Word. So the thought that I had was, much like how God sees us, others will see us outside of the church building, outside of the church. So if we want others to see us as a faithful believer, as an upright man or woman, then we need to stay in the Word and just read constantly. If we know what the Word says, then if anyone is quoting something wrong, if anyone's saying something that is not in line with Scripture, then we will see it immediately. I'm going to kind of call my dad out on this. My dad gets up used to get up at like 3 in the morning, and he would read probably, I think, 5 to 10 chapters. It got so much that I've seen it, because I used to work at the same Home Depot as him. I would see him talking to a customer, and I don't know how he would do it, but the topic of Scripture would come up, and Dad would just start quoting it. I don't know how he did it, but I would assume it's because of how much he was in the Word. So, man, I really should have put more in here. All right, coming to the end of my class, if anyone has thoughts, please engage in that. So the point I was trying to make is that God sees us in everything we do. Our sin is covered by Christ, but God still sees us. Because if God only saw his son, then he wouldn't have seen Job. He wouldn't have seen us in the womb before we were born. So, no matter what we go through, no matter what we struggle with, if our focus is on God and we trust him in everything we do, then God's going to see our heart and help us through it. Go ahead.
So I think that one thing that you can really think about is that we think we know ourselves, I really believe, I know myself, more than anybody. But then, the one thing I always think about, I can't remember the verse is, but, God knows how many hairs are on your head. And I think that it's like most people would think he's God, he's the one that created you, of course he knows that. But then I think it's like, when you really think about that passage, there were days when I felt like Josh would ask, can you do this? And I would be like, what? It would be kind of a shock, can you do it? But then in some ways, though, it's kind of like, God will open doors, opportunities for you to do things. Your mind, you'll be thinking, I can't do it. But then, why would it be presented to you, to go and do something or take over something? And then it's kind of like that thought, once you get through it, you sit there and think that, oh, that wasn't too bad. And, right. Most of the time you're just happy with yourself. But the thing that you should be thinking about was, as God working through you, that he knew what you were capable of doing. Sometimes we scare ourselves out of doing so many things, but the realization is that when those opportunities present itself, it's usually God working to let you know that I know you better than you know yourself, because I know that you'll be ready for certain steps or certain things that you may have never thought you were ready for.
Right. Kind of just going along with that, much like that, the passage where God won't allow you to be tempted beyond what you can handle. It's very much the opposite, too, of he knows what we can handle, so he will give us things to push us for instance, teaching or song leading. Good job, Miles. Just those kinds of things. God will open up opportunities for us to do those things. And I guarantee that if my brother didn't hand me a songbook when I was 12 and said, lead a song up at camp, I wouldn't be song leading today. I guarantee it. So just that idea of God sees who we are. He knows everything about us. He knows our struggles. He knows our strengths. He knows what we can handle, good and bad. And just that no matter what we go through, if we focus on Him, we trust Him, we can get through anything. A little early, but that's all I have. I don't know what the procedure is for that.
Okay, thank you, Samuel. Well, the one thing I can always say is that, I love when people come up here, and the one thing I always tell everyone is that, I can lead songs and do a lot of things up here with singing, but, I'm terrified of leading, right now I'm speaking to you, but I'm terrified of always leading a class in either a sermon or Bible study, but, I've done it before, but like I said, one day I'll probably be able to do it again, but like I said, Sammy did excellent. And I think it's one of those things that you can go over in your mind is that, God does see you as an individual, sees what's in your heart, sees what you are capable of doing, and eventually, opportunity will present itself. And I think the first thing I ever did right after I was baptized, I remember the first, I wouldn't say task, but opportunity that presented itself was with my mom. So my mom, she was the one that stayed faithful. So did my grandma, and they were the ones that pretty much pushed me into, reading more, studying more, and eventually leading the baptism where Josh baptized me. But I remember right after the baptism, I had a family dinner, the next day. And I remember I was sitting there, pretty much your typical teenager, not really doing much, but, just kind of keeping to myself. But I remember her, and this was almost my whole family, she goes and tells me that you need to lead the prayer. I'm like, what? Because, mostly it was always because there was no Christian men in my household. The only one I believe was my uncle, who was about 200 miles away. And, so it was usually my mom or my grandma that would do it because they were the only ones that were baptized. Everyone else, didn't believe. Usually they would walk out. And then when they asked me to do it, it was kind of one of those things where I was so scared and nervous. But like I said, it was time. And then I always look back on that as a building, one of the solid foundations or building blocks of where, when opportunity presents itself, you rise to the occasion. And one thing about Native Americans when it comes to prayer, when you are asked to lead a prayer for a family, it is a big deal culturally also, because usually culture-wise, only elders, it's usually the grandfathers or the head of the household that do it. So to kind of have that brought onto you, even though it's your close family, you kind of grow up knowing that, this is a big deal. So that was just one of the stories that, came back to me when I was just hearing this, this opportunity. But, well, I just wanted to bring that in. But I was going to see if we can go ahead and lead a few songs, and then we'll go ahead and take a short break, and then right before worship service. So if you could get your Gray Songbooks out, and if you could go ahead and turn to song number 214. 214. 214. And we'll go ahead and sing the first, third, and fourth verse.
Have you ever stood at the ocean with the white foam at your feet? Felt the endless thundering motion? Then I say you've seen Jesus my Lord. Have you seen Jesus my Lord? He's here in plain view. Take a look, open your eyes. a look of love in his eyes, then I say, you've seen Jesus my Lord. Have you seen Jesus my Lord? He's here in plain view. Take a look, open your eyes. He'll show it to you. Have you ever stood in the family with the Lord there in your midst? Seen the face of Christ in your brother? Then I say, you've seen Jesus my Lord. Have you seen Jesus my Lord? He's here in plain view. Take a look, open your eyes. He'll show it to you.
All right, and you could please go ahead and go to song number 903. 903. Okay, 903. There's power in the blood. And we'll go ahead and sing the first, third, and fourth verse.
Would you be free from the burden of sin? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you or evil a victory win? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be whiter, much whiter than snow? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Since things are lost in this life-giving flow, there's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you do service for Jesus your King? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you live daily his praises to sing? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb.
All right, well, we can go ahead and have some time to go ahead and gather, talk with one another. But before we do, is any last comments, something that may have came to mind while we were singing? No? All right. Well, we can go ahead and spend this time to go ahead and visit, talk with one another, and then we'll go ahead and announce when we're getting ready for,